My husband left me stranded in the rain, 37 miles from home, claiming I needed a lesson. I didn't argue or plead. I simply watched his car disappear into the mist. A few moments later, a black truck glided to a stop beside me, and my bodyguard stepped out, calm and collected. I smiled as I climbed in, realizing his cruelty had finally met its end. This would be his final mistake. Earlier that evening, I had pressed record on my phone, slipping it discreetly into my pocket just as Ethan's silver Mercedes rolled into the deserted rest stop. The rain hadn't started yet, but the air already smelled heavy with it. He didn't even bother shutting off the engine before ordering me out. "You need to learn respect, Claire," he said, voice flat, eyes forward. He had chosen the distance carefully, 37 miles. Too far to walk comfortably, too remote for help. He wanted me scared and humiliated. What Ethan didn't know was that I had been collecting evidence for 8 months. Gavin, stationed behind the abandoned gas station nearby, waited for my signal. As I turned to face my husband, the leather seat creaked softly beneath me. His jaw was locked in that self-satisfied line he always wore when sealing ruthless deals at his hedge fund. Just 3 hours earlier, we'd been at Morton's Steakhouse celebrating our anniversary. Now he was leaving me on a deserted stretch of highway because I had dared to question a missing $10,000 from our joint account. I kept my tone calm and steady, letting my phone capture everything. He launched into his lecture about consequences, claiming I had humiliated him by contacting his accountant. "Maybe a long walk will remind you who manages the money in this marriage," he sneered. My thoughts wandered to the pearl earring tucked in my jewelry box, the one that didn't belong to me. Lena's, found beneath our bed just 2 days earlier. That missing $10,000 probably bought her something elegant. I said nothing. The time to confront him hadn't arrived yet. Everything had to unfold precisely as Gavin and I had planned. "It's going to storm," I murmured, glancing at the dark clouds building above us. "Then you'd better start walking," he replied, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. "Unless you want to admit you were wrong." Before continuing, I want to thank you for being here with me today. If you believe no one deserves to be abandoned in a storm, literal or emotional, consider subscribing. It's free and helps stories like this reach those who need them most. 6 months ago, I would have apologized. 6 months ago, I still believed our marriage was worth saving. But that was before discovering the second set of company ledgers, before noticing the quiet transfers to his private accounts. When I began asking questions, his charm evaporated. Tonight was just his next move, and the one that would destroy him. "I'll walk," I said at last, opening the car door. "Smart choice," he smirked. "Maybe by the time you get home, you'll remember your place." The asphalt cracked beneath my heels as I stepped out. The rest stop was a ruin, windows boarded, the parking lot taken over by weeds. He'd chosen it deliberately for its isolation. He'd even mentioned it in passing the week before, joking about how awful it would be to be stranded there. That was when I knew exactly what he was planning. Through the window, I saw him check his phone, probably texting Lena to tell her it was done. Then the Mercedes roared away, tires squealing on wet pavement, leaving me in the growing darkness. I silently counted to 60, watching his taillights vanish around the bend before walking toward the abandoned gas station. Gavin's black Ford was hidden behind the overgrown fence. He stepped out, umbrella in hand and a thermos of coffee ready. "Did you get everything?" he asked. "Every word," I replied, stopping the recording. He actually said I needed to remember my place. Gavin's expression darkened. 3 years of watching him control you is bad enough. But this, he gestured at the deserted rest stop. "This is criminal." "Natalie's going to have a field day with that audio," I said, accepting the coffee, warmth seeping through my fingers as the first heavy drops began to fall. By morning, Ethan would think I'd spent the night trudging through the rain, broken and humiliated. He'd imagine me returning home, desperate for forgiveness. What he didn't realize was that every step of this night had been calculated. "Iris is ready?" I asked. "She's been monitoring his accounts all evening," Gavin confirmed. The moment he moved that $10,000, she traced it. 2 years of forensic auditing. He's been funneling money offshore, probably planning to leave once everything was secured. And Natalie's filing first thing? 9 sharp tomorrow morning, Gavin said. Abandonment, financial abuse, fraud, she's got enough to bury him. With tonight's recording, it's over. We climbed into the truck just as the storm broke in full force, rain hammering against the windshield. I pictured Ethan at home, pouring himself a glass of scotch, pleased with his cruelty, believing he'd put me in my place. He had no idea that 8 months ago, when he first began hiding funds, I had quietly assembled my own team. Gavin had installed hidden cameras under the guise of upgrading home security. Iris, a forensic accountant who specialized in financial abuse, tracked every dollar he tried to conceal. And Natalie, one of the city's most relentless divorce attorneys, had built a case so detailed it filled 3 boxes. The house recordings uploaded fine, Gavin said, checking his phone. We got footage from last Tuesday, him bringing Lena there while you were at your mother's. They used your bed. A chill spread through me, not heartbreak that had long since died, but a sharp, clear resolve. He's been building this for a while, I said quietly. The control, the isolation, it's textbook. Gavin nodded. Natalie says judges don't take kindly to husbands who abandon their wives for punishment. We drove through the storm in silence, following the back roads we had mapped weeks ago. Every detail had been tested, every precaution rehearsed. The hotel room was booked under my maiden name and paid in cash, funds Gavin had withdrawn carefully over 2 months. My essentials were already waiting: clothes, documents, evidence. You know he'll come looking for you when you don't show up, Gavin said. Let him, I answered. The cameras will show me checking in alone, drenched and shaken. The front desk clerk will remember how I could barely speak through the tears. Natalie's coached me on every word. The rain intensified as Gavin and I drove toward the city, the sound of it drumming steadily against the roof. By now, Ethan would be at home, probably on his 2nd glass of whiskey, maybe calling Lena to boast about how he'd taught me a lesson. Ryan Noro, he'd wake up expecting to find me shattered and repentant. Instead, he'd find his assets frozen, his office sealed, and federal investigators eager to question him about the inconsistencies Iris had discovered in his hedge funds accounts. Are you ready for this? Gavin asked as the hotel's glowing sign appeared through the downpour. I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years earlier, confident, successful, and entirely my own person, before Ethan had systematically stripped away my independence. I thought about the recordings still stored on my phone, his icy command for me to get out and walk 37 miles through a storm. I thought of Lena's earring, the empty accounts, and the hidden prenuptial agreement designed to leave me penniless. I've been ready for 8 months, I said quietly. He just handed me the last piece of proof. Gavin stopped by the hotel's side entrance. I picked up the small overnight bag we'd prepared, enough to make me look like I'd fled with nothing, and stepped out into the sheets of rain. Now it was time to become the frightened, abandoned wife. By morning, Ethan would finally understand who needed a lesson. Inside, the hotel lobby felt almost blinding after the darkness outside. Water dripped from my hair onto the marble floor as I approached the front desk, shivering just enough to sell the story. The young night clerk's eyes widened in alarm. "Oh my goodness, are you all right?" she asked, rushing out from behind the counter to wrap a towel around my shoulders. "My husband," I said, letting my voice tremble. "He left me at a rest stop. In the storm. I had to walk for miles before someone stopped." Her expression shifted from concern to horror, exactly as Natalie had predicted. Every word would make it into the hotel's official incident report. The clerk guided me to a chair, brought me hot tea, and began the check-in process. I gave her my maiden name, Claire Harrison, and paid with the emergency credit card I'd opened 6 months earlier, one Ethan didn't know existed. Room 412 was modest but safe, the city lights outside softened by the heavy rain. I locked the door, slid the chain into place, and finally exhaled. Then I retrieved the second phone Gavin had given me and replayed the recording from the car. Ethan's voice filled the room, cold, deliberate, utterly devoid of empathy. "You think you're clever, don't you? Calling my accountant behind my back, asking about finances you could never understand." My voice on the recording was calm but firm. "It's our money, Ethan. I have a right to know where it's going." He laughed sharply. "Our money? I earn it. I manage it. You spend it on overpriced groceries and those pointless charity luncheons. $70 on organic vegetables last week, Claire, 70. I remembered that trip. I'd bought ingredients for a dinner party he insisted on hosting for his clients, the same event where he spent $800 on wine without a second thought. The audio continued. You embarrass me at the Hartman's party, he ranted, contradicting me about European markets in front of my colleagues. Where did you even get those opinions? Some talk show? I have an MBA from Northwestern, my recorded voice replied steadily. I worked in finance for 5 years before we met. He snorted. Before I rescued you from that dead-end job. You were pushing penny stocks at a third-rate firm. I gave you a real life. I closed my eyes. At Henderson Investments, I hadn't been analyzing penny stocks. I'd managed a $30 million portfolio. But after years of Ethan's constant revision of the past, even I sometimes questioned my own memory. My phone buzzed with a new message from Gavin. Iris found something 3 more offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. He's been transferring funds for 18 months. 18 months. That was when the subtle shifts began. The separate accounts for tax reasons, the mysterious financial advisor, the forms he urged me to sign without reading because it's just routine stuff. Another buzz. This one from Natalie. Judge Grant granted an emergency hearing for 2 p.m. tomorrow. Bring the recording. Judge Helena Grant, known for her sharp instincts and her intolerance for manipulative husbands. Natalie had been waiting for her to take the next rotation on the bench. Timing was everything. I changed into the dry clothes I'd stashed here yesterday and sat at the small desk by the window. But instead of writing my official statement for court, I began jotting notes for myself, a quiet manifesto of everything I'd lost and everything I was reclaiming. I wrote about the promotion I'd declined because Ethan said the travel would hurt our marriage. About the investment lead I'd identified that could have tripled my personal savings if I'd still had any control over them. About my college best friend, whose calls I stopped answering after Ethan convinced me she was envious of our perfect life. My phone rang. Ethan's ringtone. I let it go to voicemail, then hit play, recording it onto the second phone. Claire, this is ridiculous, his voice began, impatient. It's been 3 hours. The point's been made. Call me back and I'll come get you. Don't make this worse than it needs to be. 10 minutes later, another call came, his tone harder now. I know you have your phone. Stop acting childish and call me. If you're trying to worry me, it's not working. I'm going to bed. Find your own way home. But beneath the bravado, I could hear it, the faint quiver of unease. His script was collapsing. I'd always called. I'd always apologized. My silence was the one thing he couldn't control. Just after midnight, my phone lit up again with an unfamiliar number. I answered, but said nothing. Hello, Claire, came a hesitant voice. It's me. Ethan asked me to call. He's worried. He said you two argued and you're not answering. He wants you to know he's sorry. He said you should come home. Lena. Ethan had never once apologized, not to me, not to anyone. The fact that he sent his mistress to deliver a fake apology only confirmed how off balance he'd become. Without a word, I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the desk. The game had finally shifted. By 1 o'clock in the morning, my phone had become a metronome of desperation. The calls came every 15 minutes, first Ethan, then his mother, Elaine, and finally his business partner, Daniel. I logged each one meticulously, noting the time, number, and the tone of each increasingly frantic message. The abandoned wife was supposed to be pleading for help, not maintaining icy silence. Instead of answering, I ordered room service and charged it to my card: soup, salad, and a single glass of wine. Let the receipt show that I was calm, that I could eat, that I wasn't unraveling as Ethan expected. At 2:30, a message appeared on my phone that made me smile, not from Ethan, but from our neighbor, Mrs. Cho. Saw Ethan in the driveway with a flashlight, looking under your car. Then he drove off fast. Is everything okay? He was searching for my vehicle, unaware that Gavin had quietly moved it to a long-term parking garage across town 2 days earlier. Another subtle trace in the record. One that suggested I'd already been planning to leave long before Ethan's little performance at the rest stop. I drew back the curtains and watched the storm lash against the city skyline. Somewhere out there, my husband was beginning to sense that his empire of control was crumbling. He thought tonight would teach me humility. Ryan Norro, when the markets opened and his offshore accounts were frozen, when his office key card failed, and when federal investigators arrived with questions about Iris's findings, he'd finally understand who had truly orchestrated the lesson. Rain slammed against the window, relentless and cleansing. 8 months of careful preparation, of gathering evidence, feigning obedience, and documenting every insult and manipulation had built to this moment. A storm of his own making. I set my alarm for 7, knowing I'd need to look believably shaken at the emergency hearing. Natalie would meet me at noon to prepare, but for now, in the hush between thunderclaps, I sat in the darkness and felt something I hadn't known in 3 years: freedom. The sun broke through the clouds at precisely 7, a pale wash of light creeping through the hotel curtains. I'd been awake since 5, sitting at the desk with my laptop open to our joint checking account. The balance confirmed what I already suspected. At 6:47 a.m., Ethan had transferred another $20,000 out. A desperate move, a last attempt to hide what was already documented. Iris had captured everything hours earlier. By noon, my hotel suite had transformed into a war room. Iris arrived first, dragging 2 heavy suitcases brimming with printed reports. Her hair was damp, her eyeliner faintly smudged, a badge of long nights spent assembling evidence. She laid out files in precise rows across the dining table: bank statements, wire records, falsified tax filings, all color-coded by category. The Cayman accounts were officially frozen at 9 this morning, she said, opening a spreadsheet on her laptop. He tried to log in 3 times around dawn. Every attempt failed. I imagine he's destroying his office right now. Moments later, Natalie entered mid-call, her tone sharp and legal. When she hung up, her expression carried a mix of fatigue and satisfaction. Judge Grant moved the hearing to 1 o'clock. She wants this handled today. Also, Ethan just retained Thomas Calder. Gavin appeared in the doorway, carrying a box of electronics. The shark? The same one who defended that pharma executive last year. Natalie nodded grimly. Yes, and he doesn't work cheap. Ethan must have liquidated something major to afford him. For a fleeting moment, concern flickered through me, but Natalie's steady hand on my shoulder anchored me. Calder's skilled, she said, but he can't argue against documentation, timestamps, and video. He's walking in cold. We've been preparing for 8 months. Gavin connected his laptop to the television, glancing at me before hitting play. I've compiled the highlights, he said softly. Just be prepared, Claire. Some of this is rough. The first clip appeared, a grainy night vision shot from Ethan's study, recorded 3 weeks earlier at 2 a.m. I was upstairs then, asleep under the haze of sleeping pills he'd insisted I take for stress. On screen, Ethan photographed documents from our safe, then carefully replaced them. Iris's voice cut through the silence. He's been replicating originals, investment portfolios, your mother's power of attorney, the lake house deed. Look here, he's creating forgeries with subtle differences. If you hadn't intercepted this, he could have replaced the real ones one by one. The next clip made my stomach twist. Ethan and Lena in our living room 2 months ago, the same night he'd claimed to be at a client dinner. She wore my silk robe, the one from our honeymoon in Paris, and laughed at something on his phone. Turn the volume up, I said quietly, though bile rose in my throat. Ethan's voice filled the room. She actually believed the conference was mandatory. I've trained her well. A few more months and everything will be transferred. Then we can stop pretending. Lena's laugh followed, brittle and sharp. The prenup really says she gets nothing? The prenup's meaningless, he replied. She won't fight it. Claire doesn't have the backbone. By the time she figures it out, we'll be in Costa Rica and she'll be too broken to act. Gavin froze the frame. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioner. I stood and crossed to the window, staring down at the sprawling city below. Somewhere out there, Ethan was pacing, shouting into his phone, realizing his control was slipping grain by grain. "There's more," Gavin said gently. "Do you want to see it?" I nodded once. The next clip showed Ethan pacing the garage, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and venomous. The timestamp read last Tuesday, when I'd been at book club. "Lauren's been perfect," he was saying. "She has no clue I'm recording our conversations. Every detail about my mother's estate, her concealed Alzheimer's diagnosis, and the trust fund our late father had left behind, it was all there. Nearly $2 million I hadn't even known existed." My knees nearly gave out. Lauren, my younger sister, the one I'd defended for years, the one I'd covered for every time her gambling debts resurfaced, had been feeding Ethan private family information. "When did he contact her?" I asked, barely able to push the words out. Iris pulled up a screen filled with phone logs. "The first contact was 13 months ago. Regular calls began about 10 months later, always when you were out. He's been paying off her debts in exchange for information." Natalie checked her watch. "We have 30 minutes until court. Claire, are you ready for this?" I turned from the window. "Not yet. Show me the rest. I need to see everything." Gavin opened another folder. These came from his office computer. My contact in IT pulled them before Ethan's access was terminated this morning. The monitor filled with a chain of emails between Ethan and his attorney, dated 6 months earlier. The subject line read Project Fresh Start. The contents were chilling: strategies for divorcing me in a way that would strip me of everything, psychological tactics to make me doubt my sanity, instructions on concealing assets, even guidance on escalating emotional abuse to weaken my resistance. One line burned into my memory. "The key is to make her believe she's losing her mind. Gaslight her constantly, hide objects, deny conversations, contradict her memories. By the time we file, she'll be too unstable to fight back." Suddenly, the fragments of the last year rearranged themselves into something horrifyingly clear. The dinner reservations he swore I'd never mentioned. The conversations about visiting my parents that he insisted never happened. The jewelry that disappeared and reappeared in impossible places. I had started keeping a secret notebook, convinced I was slipping mentally. I wasn't. He'd been following a playbook. Natalie's voice was calm but steely. "His lawyer, Martin Rhodes, is known for handling high-net-worth divorces where one spouse wants to leave the other destitute. He's already under investigation by the bar for ethics violations." Iris scrolled to the final document. "This," she said, "is what triggered our emergency filing. Yesterday afternoon, Ethan transferred $3.22 million from client accounts into his personal offshore account in Panama. Then he left you at the rest stop. He must have believed he had more time before anyone noticed." Realization hit me like a physical blow. "He was running," I whispered. The abandonment wasn't just about control. He knew something was closing in. Natalie allowed herself a faint smile. "The SEC received an anonymous tip about irregularities in his fund reports yesterday morning." I turned to Iris. "You?" She nodded slightly. "Once I confirmed the embezzlement, we were required to report it." The enormity of Ethan's crimes pressed down on me. This wasn't only about betrayal or infidelity. It was about the destruction of trust, of livelihoods, of innocent investors whose savings he'd stolen to fuel his escape. The man I'd shared a bed with for 3 years wasn't just cruel, he was criminal. "Judge Grant needs to see all of it," I said firmly, my voice steadying. "Every recording, every statement, every file." Natalie's lips curved into a tight, confident smile. "She'll see it all," she promised. "And then Ethan Whitmore will finally understand what it means to lose everything." The courthouse loomed like a monument to power: polished marble floors, towering mahogany walls, and a silence that seemed to weigh on every step. I wore my navy suit, the one Ethan had never seen, purchased specifically for this moment. Natalie strode beside me, her briefcase in hand, while Gavin followed close behind. We entered courtroom 4B at exactly 12:55. Ethan was already seated beside Thomas Calder, the infamous defense attorney whose $1,000 haircut couldn't hide the exhaustion on his face. Ethan himself looked diminished, his once perfect suit wrinkled, eyes shadowed, and his posture betraying a man who'd spent the night pacing his office instead of sleeping. When our eyes met, his expression twisted from fatigue to barely contained fury. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Helena Grant entered, her black robes flowing as she took her seat. She scanned the documents before her, reading glasses perched halfway down her nose. "We're here for an emergency petition filed by Claire Whitmore regarding marital assets and spousal abandonment," she began, her voice clear and commanding. "Mr. Calder, I see you've only just been retained this morning." "Yes, Your Honor. We request a continuance to review the evidence properly." "Denied," she said without hesitation. "Your client allegedly abandoned his wife in dangerous conditions last night. Time is critical." She turned to Natalie. "Counselor, proceed." Natalie rose smoothly, every motion deliberate. "Your Honor, at approximately 8:47 p.m. yesterday evening, Ethan Whitmore deliberately abandoned his wife at a rest stop 37 miles from their home during an active storm. We have an audio recording of the event." The courtroom speakers crackled to life, filling the air with Ethan's voice, cold, calculated, unmistakable. "You need a lesson, Claire. Walking home might teach you some respect." Ethan's complexion drained of color. Calder leaned in, whispering urgently, but Ethan shook his head in disbelief, hands tightening into fists. Natalie continued, her tone crisp and unwavering. "Additionally, Mr. Whitmore has concealed marital assets over an 18-month period. We have documented evidence of offshore accounts totaling $8 million and embezzled client funds amounting to $3.2 million. Calder sprang to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. These claims are unsubstantiated." "Then let's substantiate them," Natalie replied coolly, lifting a set of documents. "Exhibits A through F, wire transfers to the Cayman Islands, all executed personally by Mr. Whitmore without his wife's knowledge or consent." Judge Grant reviewed each page carefully. Her expression darkened with every line. Finally, she looked up, her gaze sharp. "Mr. Whitmore, did you abandon your wife last night?" Ethan stood, straightening his tie, forcing a thin smile. "Your Honor, there's been a misunderstanding. My wife and I had a disagreement. It's a yes or no question, Mr. Whitmore." He hesitated. I left her at a rest stop. During a storm? 37 miles from home. She had her phone," he stammered. "She could have called someone." The judge's brows arched. "How considerate of you." She turned back to Natalie. "Continue." Natalie pulled up the next set of files on the courtroom screen. "Mr. Whitmore has also been involved in an extramarital affair with his assistant, Ms. Lena Cruz, using joint marital funds to finance gifts and travel. This includes a pearl necklace valued at $12,000, which Mr. Whitmore reported to his insurance company as stolen, but in fact gave to Ms. Cruz." Before she could continue, my phone buzzed. Gavin's message appeared on the screen. "He's here." The double doors opened. Ryan Cho from the SEC entered with 2 federal agents at his side. Ethan's head snapped toward them, and for the first time I saw something new in his eyes: fear. "Your Honor," Ryan Cho said respectfully, "apologies for the interruption. We have a federal warrant for Ethan Whitmore's arrest on charges of wire fraud and embezzlement." Calder shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." "So is stealing $3.2 million from client accounts," Judge Grant replied dryly. Then she turned to the agents. "Gentlemen, please remain until we conclude this hearing. Mr. Whitmore won't be leaving." Ethan collapsed into his chair, pale and trembling. His phone, sitting on the defense table, lit up over and over calls from his mother, from his partner Daniel, and repeatedly from Lena. "Given the evidence," Judge Grant continued, "I am granting the emergency injunction. All marital assets are hereby frozen pending full investigation. Mrs. Whitmore is awarded exclusive use of the marital home and temporary spousal support of $10,000 per month. Mr. Whitmore, you are to remain at least 500 feet away from your wife." Ethan shot up, his voice cracking. $10,000 a month? That's insane. She doesn't need. Mr. Whitmore, the judge cut in, her tone sharp. You abandoned your wife in a storm after hiding millions in marital assets. I'm being generous by not holding you in contempt right now. Sit down. He slumped back into his seat. My phone buzzed again, Lauren. I declined the call. It rang again and again. You should document those, Natalie murmured. I nodded, taking screenshots. 17 calls from Lauren in the past hour, 43 from Ethan since last night, 22 from his mother, Elaine, and several unknown numbers, probably colleagues or clients who'd already caught wind of the federal raid. Ryan Cho approached our table as the judge signed the final orders. Mrs. Whitmore, we'll need your cooperation. Your attorney mentioned you've compiled evidence. 8 months' worth, I said. Financial records, recordings, correspondence, everything. Good, he replied. Your husband is looking at 15 to 20 years if convicted on all counts. Ethan must have heard him. He leapt up, finger trembling as he pointed toward me. You did this. You set me up. This whole thing was a trap. Judge Grant slammed her gavel. Mr. Whitmore, control yourself or I will add contempt charges. She's been planning this, he shouted, his voice cracking. The recordings, the files, she knew I was going to leave her there. So you admit you abandoned her? The judge asked coolly. Calder lunged, pulling him back down, but the confession already hung in the air. Ethan had just incriminated himself before federal witnesses. The doors burst open again. Lena Cruz stumbled inside, mascara running, her designer dress wrinkled. Her eyes darted wildly until they locked on Ethan. You said you were divorced, she screamed. You told me the papers were filed. You said she was crazy, that she was making everything up. The judge sighed. Ma'am, please remove yourself from my courtroom. But Lena pressed forward, waving her phone. I have texts. Recordings. He promised we'd be married. He said the money was his. Ryan Cho's eyes gleamed. Ma'am, we'd very much like to speak with you, he said, gesturing for the agents. And, just like that, Ethan's world disintegrated. His mistress had turned witness, his assets were frozen, his crimes exposed. Federal agents stood ready to escort him out in handcuffs. As we exited, the chaos erupted behind us. My phone buzzed with one final message, Elaine. I hope you're satisfied. Destroying a good man out of jealousy. I deleted it without replying. Elaine would soon understand her son wasn't a good man. He was a criminal who had simply destroyed himself. Outside, the courthouse steps were swarming with reporters. Someone had leaked the story. Microphones flashed like lightning as Natalie guided me through the crowd. Mrs. Whitmore, is it true your husband stole millions? How long have you been planning this? Will you press additional charges? Natalie raised her voice above the noise. My client will not be making any statements at this time. The federal investigation is ongoing. We pushed through to Gavin's truck. Across the street, a news van was already broadcasting. By tonight, Ethan's mugshot would headline every station, the once golden hedge fund prodigy of Minneapolis exposed for fraud and embezzlement. Back at the hotel, I sank into the couch as Natalie poured 2 glasses of water. My phone hadn't stopped vibrating since we left court. Messages flooded in: shock, sympathy, curiosity. From my hairdresser, just saw the news. Good for you, sweetheart. From Ethan's golf partner Thomas, this has to be a mistake, right? Ethan would never. From 3 different neighbors, we always knew something felt off about him. But the most unexpected message came from Daniel Hartman, Ethan's business partner. Claire, we need to talk. There are things about the fund you should know, things not in the federal filing. Natalie read over my shoulder. Set it up. And record everything. By 4 o'clock, the evening news broke the full story. Across the screen ran the headline. Prominent hedge fund manager arrested for embezzlement following spousal abandonment incident. Ethan's booking photo filled the frame, haggard, unshaven, his designer suit replaced by a standard-issue jumpsuit. The reporter stood outside what was once our home, now legally mine, narrating breathlessly. Sources confirm that Ethan Whitmore allegedly abandoned his wife during last night's severe storm, leaving her stranded 37 miles from home. The morning news ran the story in a tone of solemn finality. Federal agents have arrested Ethan Whitmore on charges of embezzling $3.2 million from client accounts. His wife, Claire Whitmore, could not be reached for comment. My phone rang again, Lauren. Against my better judgment, I answered. You told him about Mom's will, I said flatly. About the trust fund Dad created. About her diagnosis. There was only silence at first, and then her voice came, small and trembling. He said he was trying to help. He told me you were too overwhelmed to deal with it all. He said he just wanted to protect you. He paid off my gambling debts, Claire. I didn't know what he was planning. I thought he loved you. Her words spilled out in broken fragments, desperate to justify the unforgivable. He said you were fragile, that you needed guidance. He made it sound like he was taking care of everyone. I thought about all the seemingly harmless calls she'd made over the past year, asking about Mom's health, about the family lawyer, about Dad's old property in Wisconsin. Each had been reconnaissance, and I hadn't seen it. He played you, I said quietly. Just like he played me. I'm so sorry, Lauren whispered. When I saw the news, what he'd done, I've been sick all day. Can we meet? Please. Natalie shook her head beside me, but something in Lauren's voice made me hesitate. It wasn't deflection. It was guilt, raw and human. Ryanoro, I said. Neutral location. Alone. After I hung up, Gavin turned his laptop toward me. You should see this. Ethan's company Facebook page was collapsing in real time, hundreds of furious comments demanding refunds, investors threatening lawsuits, and former employees sharing stories of manipulation. One woman wrote, "He fired me when I asked about missing funds last year. Now I know why." But the most devastating blow came from Lena. She had gone public on Instagram, releasing screenshots of text messages, photos from their expensive trips, and a lengthy post exposing Ethan's manipulation. He told me his wife was unstable, she wrote. He said she refused to grant him a divorce and threatened to ruin him. I believed every word because he was so convincing, so sophisticated. I was a fool, but he was a master liar. The photos were damning. Ethan and Lena sipping champagne in first class on the way to Paris. Ethan and Lena lounging at the same Mexican resort where we'd spent our 5th anniversary. Ethan and Lena in our bed, she'd actually posted that one before it was removed. By 6 o'clock, his mother, Elaine, had issued a formal statement through her attorney. Natalie read it aloud, unable to hide her laughter. The Whitmore family is shocked by these allegations. We believe this is a coordinated attack orchestrated by a vindictive spouse seeking financial gain. Ethan Whitmore is an upstanding member of the community who has been victimized by a calculating woman who married him for his wealth. Gavin snorted. She's really going with that story? After what everyone heard in court. Before I could respond, my phone rang again, an unfamiliar number. Against Natalie's advice, I answered. Mrs. Whitmore, this is Helena Liang from the Wall Street Journal. We're running a piece on systemic fraud in boutique hedge funds. Your husband's case fits into a larger pattern. Would you be willing to comment? Natalie swiftly took the phone. This is Claire Whitmore's attorney. All media inquiries should go through my office. She hung up and turned to me. By tomorrow, it'll be national news. He didn't just ruin himself, he exposed an entire network of corrupt fund managers. The FBI's expanding the probe. I walked to the window and stared at the city below. Somewhere in a holding cell, Ethan was likely meeting with Calder, scrambling to find a way to twist reality. But there was no spin that could erase the footage, the recordings, or the trail of stolen money. Then my phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Colin Avery, Ethan's largest client. Mrs. Whitmore, several of us are pursuing civil suits against your husband. We want to be clear, you are not our target. We know you were one of his victims. We'd like you to testify. The irony was perfect. Ethan had spent years telling me I was too naive to understand finance, too emotional to grasp his complex world. Now his former clients wanted me to help bury him, with my knowledge, my evidence, and my voice. As the sun sank over Minneapolis, painting the sky in amber streaks, I realized Ethan's downfall was only beginning. Ryanoro, there would be more headlines, more confessions, more people stepping out of the shadows to tell their stories. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, I sat in stillness, no longer fearing his footsteps or his temper. The man who left me in the rain had created his own storm, and now he was drowning in it. The next morning, a knock startled me from my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone. Peering through the peephole, I saw Lauren standing in the hallway. Her perfect facade was gone, hair messy, eyes swollen, hands trembling around a manila envelope clutched to her chest. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. We were supposed to meet somewhere neutral. I couldn't wait, she said, voice shaking. There are things you need to know before the FBI questions me this afternoon. Gavin appeared in the doorway of the adjoining room, alert. I gave him a brief nod. He stayed close as Lauren stepped inside and sat on the edge of the couch, setting the envelope on the coffee table. Ethan first contacted me 13 months ago, she began, eyes cast downward. He knew about the gambling. I don't know how, but he did. I owed $47,000 to some very dangerous people. He offered to pay it all, no questions asked, if I just answered some questions about our family's finances. And you agreed, I said evenly. I was desperate, she whispered. They were threatening my job, my reputation. Ethan made it sound like he wanted to help, like he was protecting you. He said you were too proud to ask Mom and Dad for help, that he just wanted to fix things quietly. She opened the envelope and slid a stack of printed emails across the table, her hands trembling as she pushed them toward me. These are all of them, Lauren said, sliding the envelope closer. Every message, every email. I printed them last night when I finally understood what he'd been doing. I picked up the first page, dated more than a year earlier. Ethan's tone was warm, disarmingly sincere. He sounded like a devoted husband trying to connect. He wrote about wanting to be a better man, about understanding my family's history so he could support me more fully. It was the same false empathy that had once fooled me. His manipulation had been surgical, deliberate. He asked most about Mom, Lauren continued, tears streaking her face. He said he wanted to make sure she was getting the best care. I thought he was planning to do something kind, maybe pay for a better facility. You told him about the Alzheimer's, I said softly. She nodded. She made me promise not to tell you. She didn't want you worrying. And he was so gentle, so thoughtful, said he'd noticed things, wanted to help. I didn't see it for what it was. The emails grew darker as I read on. His questions became more direct. What properties did my parents own? Were there any trusts? Who held power of attorney? Who managed their wills? And Lauren, believing she was helping him help us, had answered every one. Last month, he asked me to get Mom to sign some papers, Lauren said, her voice cracking. He told me they were insurance forms, that it would protect her assets if her condition worsened. I actually took them to her, Claire. Thank God her lawyer was there that day. He recognized them as property transfer documents. That's when I started realizing something was wrong. My phone buzzed, Colin Avery. I put it on speaker so Gavin could listen. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm sorry to disturb you, Colin said, his voice low and urgent. But this can't wait. I've been going through our client files all night. Ethan wasn't just stealing from the general fund. He was specifically targeting elderly clients, especially widows. I felt my stomach knot. What do you mean, targeting? Take Mrs. Grace Latham, Colin continued. Her husband passed 2 years ago and left her everything, instructing Ethan to personally manage her investments. Within 6 months, he'd convinced her to sign power of attorney. She thought it was just to authorize trades. He used it to empty her accounts. How much? I asked quietly. $800,000, Colin said. But the worst part? He convinced her she was losing her memory, that she'd already approved the withdrawals. He made her doubt her mind. Gavin's pen scratched across his notepad, documenting everything for Natalie. The scope of what Ethan had done was staggering. He wasn't just a manipulative husband or a greedy financier. He was a predator who hunted vulnerability. I have recordings, Colin added. I started documenting meetings 2 years ago when I noticed inconsistencies. I planned to go to the SEC but was scared. Ethan had friends in every corner of the industry. But now that he's in custody, I'll hand over everything. When the call ended, Lauren pulled out one final paper from her envelope. There's something else, she said. About Dad's estate. Our father had died 5 years earlier, leaving what we thought was a modest inheritance split between us. But the document she handed me told a different story. It showed a trust account, created the year before his death, held solely in my name. He knew about my gambling, Lauren said, her voice breaking. He loved me, but he didn't trust me with money. So, he set this up for you. Mom was the trustee. It's worth about $2 million. Ethan found out about it through me, and he's been trying to access it for months. $2 million. Money my father had hidden to shield it from Lauren's addiction and, unknowingly, from my husband's greed. The account was at a small private bank in Wisconsin, one Ethan would never have known about without Lauren's betrayal. We need to go see Mom, Lauren said. She's been keeping something for you, something she wouldn't even tell me about. She said she was waiting for the right time. An hour later, we sat in my mother's room at the memory care facility. By some miracle, she was lucid, her eyes bright and focused. She squeezed my hand, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in months. I knew what he was the first time I met him, she said. The way he looked around our house, assessing everything like he was adding it to an inventory. The way every conversation turned toward money. Dad saw it too, she added, opening the drawer beside her bed. She pulled out a small brass key. Safety deposit box. First National Bank on Hennepin. Your father placed things there the week before he died, documents, evidence. Evidence of what? I asked. Ethan tried to forge your signature last year, she said firmly. Loan applications. Property transfers. The bank manager was your father's friend. He called me immediately and sent copies. They're all in the box. I took the key, feeling its weight like a promise. My father had been protecting me even in death. My mother, despite her illness, had safeguarded that protection in silence. There's more, she whispered, her grip tightening. The FBI came yesterday. Not about Ethan's arrest, about something bigger. His name came up in a long-term investigation, one that's been active for 3 years. They're looking into a network of fund managers defrauding elderly clients across 5 states. The air seemed to thicken. It all made sense now, Ethan's paranoia, the erratic transfers, the desperate attempt to leave me powerless. The night he abandoned me in the rain wasn't punishment, it was panic. He knew the walls were closing in and needed someone to blame when they did. He never thought you'd fight back, Mom said, a faint smile curving her lips. Men like him never do. They think compassion is weakness. They always learn too late that it isn't. As we left, she squeezed my hand one final time. Your father would be proud of you, Claire. You're stronger than he ever gave you credit for. Driving away, Lauren silent beside me and Gavin's truck following close behind, I thought about how deep Ethan's deception ran. Every revelation revealed another layer of rot. He wasn't just one corrupt man, he was the keystone in an entire network of financial abuse. But his fatal mistake was simple. He believed the woman he left in the rain would stay there, shivering and broken. Instead, she had become the storm that would wash away everything he'd built. The First National Bank on Hennepin looked like a relic from another era, tall marble columns, brass fixtures, and the kind of quiet that held secrets. Lauren waited in the car while Gavin accompanied me inside. The vault was cool and still, the air heavy with age. Mr. Behrens, the bank manager, recognized my father's name instantly. He handled the key with reverence before guiding me to a small private room. The safety deposit box clicked open with a sound that felt like history unfolding. Inside was a stack of documents that made my hands shake, loan forms, property deeds, and financial statements, all bearing my forged signature. Each one dated 6 months ago. Proof that Ethan's greed had pushed him to cross not only legal boundaries, but moral ones my father had long seen coming. Property transfer papers for my grandmother's lake house, the one Ethan had apparently tried to sell without my knowledge. Bank statements from accounts I'd never seen before, opened in my name but controlled entirely by him. My father had somehow obtained copies of everything, his handwriting appearing on sticky notes explaining what each document meant. One note, attached to a forged power of attorney, simply read, "He will try to take everything. Don't let him." Gavin photographed every page while I sat in stunned silence. The scope of Ethan's betrayal kept expanding like ink spreading through water. This wasn't just about our marriage or even the stolen millions. He had been systematically working to erase my financial existence, to make me completely dependent on him, or worse, to frame me for his crimes if it ever became necessary. For months later, I walked into the federal courthouse for the first day of Ethan's criminal trial. The media attention had only intensified since his arrest. News vans lined the street, and reporters called out questions I didn't answer. I wore a charcoal gray suit that had never hung in our shared closet, bought specifically for this day. Professional, composed, and elegant enough to show that I wasn't broken. Ethan sat at the defendant's table in a suit that no longer fit. He'd lost weight in custody, and his once perfect hair had grown out unevenly. When our eyes met across the courtroom, I smiled, the same serene smile I used to give him over morning coffee when he'd lecture me about my spending. Only now, that smile carried the weight of everything I knew and everything he was about to lose. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Anthony Delgado, presented the case with calm precision. 12 counts of wire fraud. 2 counts of elder abuse. 1 count of conspiracy to commit financial crimes. The evidence was overwhelming: doctored books, hidden accounts, forged documents, and recordings of Ethan openly discussing how he stole from clients. For 11 days, witness after witness took the stand. Elderly clients described how Ethan had convinced them to sign documents they didn't understand. Former employees testified about being ordered to falsify records. A forensic accountant guided the jury through the labyrinth of offshore accounts and shell companies Ethan had constructed. On day 12, the courtroom doors opened and Lena Cruz walked in. She looked nothing like the polished young woman who'd once worn my grandmother's pearls. Her designer wardrobe had been replaced with a conservative dress, her elaborate hairstyle with a plain bun. She had been granted immunity in exchange for her testimony, and she was about to bury him with it. "Ms. Cruz," the prosecutor began, "how long were you romantically involved with the defendant?" 18 months, she answered quietly, her voice steady. "And during that time, did Mr. Whitmore ever discuss his business practices with you?" "Yes, frequently." He thought it was amusing to explain how he was moving money around without anyone noticing. He said it was like playing three-dimensional chess while everyone else played checkers. She produced recordings from her phone, conversations where Ethan bragged about targeting elderly clients, hiding money from me, and planning to disappear to Costa Rica once he'd accumulated enough. In one recording, his voice was unmistakable. "Claire's the perfect cover. Sweet, trusting, asks no questions. By the time she figures out what's happening, I'll be gone, and she'll be left holding the bag." But Lena's most devastating revelation came near the end of her testimony. 3 weeks before his arrest, she said, Ethan told me he was planning to leave me too. He had another woman in Costa Rica, someone he'd met online. He was going to abandon me just like he abandoned his wife. The look on Ethan's face was worth every ounce of pain he'd ever caused me. His jaw dropped. His attorney frantically whispered in his ear, but the damage was irreversible. His mistress had just exposed that he'd been deceiving everyone, even her. The next day brought another shock. A young man named Nathan Price took the stand, 22 years old, with Ethan's same sharp jawline and calculating eyes. The prosecutor quickly established his identity, Ethan's son from a college relationship, whose existence he had hidden for more than 2 decades. "My mother has been receiving payments from Ethan Whitmore for 22 years, Nathan testified. $1,500 a month to stay silent about my existence. She has records proving the money came from his client accounts." I watched Ethan sink lower in his chair as Nathan continued. "He told my mother that if she ever contacted his family or went public, he'd destroy her reputation and make sure she never worked in finance again. She has that threat in writing." The prosecutor presented 22 years of bank records showing consistent payments from the same accounts Ethan had been draining. He hadn't just stolen to fund his lifestyle, he had stolen to cover his past. Ethan's defense attorney tried to object, claiming the testimony was prejudicial and irrelevant to the financial charges, but Judge Grant overruled him. It establishes a clear pattern of deception and financial misconduct spanning the defendant's entire adult life, she said firmly. On the final day of testimony, Ethan made the catastrophic mistake of taking the stand. Against his attorney's visible protests, he stood and walked to the witness box, still believing he could charm his way out of ruin. For 2 hours, he spun a story in which he was the victim. He claimed I had known about his affairs and approved. He insisted that every client had authorized their transactions. He portrayed himself as a misunderstood financial genius guilty only of bookkeeping errors. Then came the cross-examination. When confronted with recordings, he said they were taken out of context. When shown the forged documents, he suggested I had fabricated them. When questioned about the hush money to Nathan's mother, he said that was a personal matter, unrelated to my business. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When the foreman stood, I held Gavin's hand on one side and Natalie's on the other. On count 1, wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On count 2, wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. By the time they reached count 15, Ethan had buried his head in his hands. Guilty on all charges. The man who had once left me stranded in the rain 37 miles from home was finally about to learn what true abandonment felt like. 2 weeks later, we returned for sentencing. Judge Grant, the same woman who had presided over our emergency hearing months earlier, looked down at Ethan with unfiltered contempt. "Mr. Whitmore," she began, "you targeted the most vulnerable members of society. You betrayed the trust of your clients, colleagues, and family. You have shown no remorse and accepted no responsibility, even when confronted with overwhelming evidence of your crimes. This court sentences you to 96 months in federal prison without the possibility of early release. 8 years. Ethan would spend 8 years behind bars. As the bailiffs moved to escort him out, he turned toward me one last time. His lips shaped the words, "This isn't over." I stood, meeting his eyes, and spoke clearly enough for the courtroom microphones to record it. "You're right," I said. "The civil suits start next month." The bailiffs led Ethan away in shackles, and I stepped out of the courthouse into a September afternoon that felt like the first day of spring. The civil suits did begin the following month, 17 of Ethan's victims seeking restitution, but that was Natalie's battlefield now. I had something else to build. 6 weeks after Ethan's sentencing, the whistleblower reward came through, between $1.2 and $2 million for providing evidence that helped recover stolen funds. Combined with the court-awarded assets and the trust fund my father had safeguarded, I suddenly had the resources to turn pain into purpose. Gavin found the building first, a restored Victorian in Minneapolis's Whittier neighborhood that had once housed a law firm. 3 stories, 8 offices, a spacious conference room, and, most importantly, multiple exits. A necessity for women escaping dangerous situations. We signed the lease on a Thursday. By Monday, the Phoenix Foundation had its home. "We need proper security," Gavin said, walking the halls with his tablet, taking notes. Panic buttons in every office, controlled entry, and surveillance that actually protects people instead of spying on them. Iris arrived carrying boxes of filing systems and encryption software. "I've already had 3 forensic accountants volunteer," she said. Word spreading in the financial community about what we're doing. Natalie took a leave of absence from her firm to establish our legal aid division. "We have to structure this carefully," she warned, spreading incorporation papers across the conference table. "We'll be dealing with dangerous people, angry spouses, retaliation. Every document has to be airtight." Within a month, we had our first client. Clara, a teacher whose husband had hidden their savings and threatened to report her to immigration authorities if she left him, even though she was a citizen. Iris traced the money. Natalie filed the petitions. Gavin arranged secure transportation. I sat with Clara as she cried, remembering my own tears in that hotel room the night Ethan left me stranded. Lauren showed up on a rainy Tuesday, 3 months sober, carrying a box of donuts as a peace offering. "I want to help," she said simply. "I know what it's like to be manipulated, to be so desperate that you betray the people you love. Maybe I can help others recognize the signs before it's too late." We started her with small tasks, answering phones, filing paperwork, but she had a natural gift for talking to women in crisis. She understood desperation, shame, and the slow erosion of self-worth in ways even trained counselors sometimes missed. Within 6 months, she was running our support groups, sharing her story about how Ethan had exploited her addiction to gather family secrets, teaching others how to spot the same manipulation. My mother came to visit on one of her clearer days. Gavin drove her carefully through the city she once knew by heart. She sat in my office, studying the framed photos on the wall, women who had given permission to share their stories, smiling beside new apartments, diplomas, or their children. "Your father would be proud," she said softly, touching a photo of a woman who'd escaped with her 3 children and was now in nursing school. "He always said the best revenge against cruelty was kindness." She reached into her purse and handed me an envelope. "This came to the house. I thought you should see it." Inside was a clipping from the prison newsletter. Ethan had been elected treasurer of the inmates' investment club. Even behind bars, he was still trying to preserve his image as a financial prodigy. I almost laughed. The most unexpected volunteer came 7 months after the trial. Lena Cruz stood in our reception area looking nothing like the woman who'd once worn my grandmother's pearls. Her hair was short now, her designer wardrobe replaced by simple slacks and a white button-down. "I've been in therapy," she said quietly, sitting across from me. "Working through why I got involved with someone like Ethan, why I ignored every red flag, and why I helped him hurt you. I know I can't undo what I did, but maybe I can stop other women from making the same mistakes." She began speaking at universities, addressing business students about predatory mentors and the illusion of power. She was brutally honest about her own choices, explaining how manipulation can disguise itself as opportunity. "He made me feel exceptional," she told a graduate class once. "Smarter, more sophisticated than women my age." By the time I realized I was just another pawn in his game, I couldn't see a way out. 1 year after Ethan's sentencing, a letter arrived at the foundation. His handwriting was as elegant as ever, even on prison stationery, 4 pages of venom blaming me for his downfall. He claimed I'd orchestrated everything, that I'd entrapped him. The final line read, "I hope you learned your lesson." I had the letter professionally framed and hung it beside my degrees. When clients asked about it, I always told the truth. Yes, I had learned my lesson. I'd learned that when someone shows you who they are through cruelty, believe them. I'd learned that patience and planning can dismantle years of abuse. And most of all, I'd learned that the best response to someone who tries to break you is to become unbreakable, then use that strength to lift others. 18 months after the night at the rest stop, I stood in my office surrounded by thank you cards. 87 women had found safety through the Phoenix Foundation. Some needed only legal guidance and financial forensics. Others required full extractions, safe houses, new identities, new beginnings. Each had once believed she was trapped. Each had discovered she wasn't. Among our largest donors was Grace Latham, the widow Ethan had defrauded. She said the same thing my father once had. The best revenge isn't punishment. It's rebuilding what someone tried to destroy and helping others do the same. She'd recovered most of her losses through the civil suits and insisted on funding our emergency shelter initiative. At one point, that man tried to convince me I was losing my mind, she said during our first fundraising gala. But Claire showed me I wasn't losing anything, I was finally finding my strength. Outside, rain fell steadily, drumming against the windows of the old Victorian that now stood as a refuge for hope and second chances. I thought back to that night, 37 miles from home, standing in the downpour as Ethan drove away, so certain he'd broken me. He believed he was teaching me a lesson about power, control, and submission. But what he really taught me was that cruelty always carries its own undoing. Every act of domination plants the seed of its consequence, and sometimes, the person you abandon in the rain has already seen the storm coming and prepared for it. Through the Phoenix Foundation, his act of calculated cruelty had become the spark that ignited a mission to protect women he'd never have believed were worth saving. The ultimate lesson, the one Ethan never saw coming, wasn't about obedience or respect or staying in one's place. It was about transformation. He had tried to leave me powerless in the storm. Instead, I became the shelter. If this story of calculated justice kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite moment will always be when Claire stood in court, wearing the sharp suit Ethan once claimed made women look too aggressive, and smiled at him with the same calm expression she used to wear over breakfast. What was your favorite moment of sweet revenge? Share it in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more gripping stories like this.